The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the verdict. 152 airports across America sat empty, their terminals dark. Flight attendant Christine Palmer stood trembling, realizing too late that the young black woman she'd humiliated on Flight 447 wasn't just any passenger. She was the daughter of the nation's most powerful aviation regulator, and her single act of cruelty had just grounded an entire industry. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. If you believe in standing up against injustice, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss stories that matter. Now, let's go back to where it all began, because what happened on that flight will shock you. Gate 23 at Dallas International Airport buzzed with the usual pre-boarding chaos. Travelers shuffled through lines, dragging suitcases and checking phones. Among them stood Ada Hayes, a 27-year-old black woman clutching a worn leather purse against her chest. She wore faded jeans and a college sweatshirt, her eyes red from crying. The purse had belonged to her mother, who had died just 3 days earlier. Inside were photographs, letters, memories of a woman who had spent her life fighting for civil rights. Ada was flying to New York for the funeral. Her first-class ticket crinkled in her trembling hand. Her father, Theodore Hayes, had insisted on purchasing it. "Your mother would want you comfortable," he'd said. Ada hadn't argued. She was too exhausted from grief to care about luxury. She just wanted to get there, say goodbye, and try to figure out how to live in a world without her mother's voice. The gate agent called for first-class boarding. Ada gathered her small carry-on and approached the jet bridge. The flight attendant at the aircraft door wore a crisp navy uniform and a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her name tag read Christine Palmer. "Welcome aboard," Christine said automatically, but her gaze sharpened when she saw Ada. Her eyes traveled from Ada's sneakers to her casual clothes, lingering with unmistakable suspicion. Ada stepped into the first-class cabin. The seats were wide and plush, wrapped in cream-colored leather. Only a few passengers had boarded. An older white man in an expensive suit occupied seat 3C, already sipping champagne. A white woman with perfectly styled silver hair settled into 4A, her designer handbag tucked carefully beside her. Ada found her seat, 2A, by the window. She placed her mother's purse on her lap and her carry-on in the overhead bin. As she sat down, she felt Christine's presence behind her. "Excuse me, miss." Christine's voice cut through the quiet cabin. "I think you're in the wrong section." Ada looked up, confused. "I'm sorry. This is first class." Christine's tone suggested she was explaining something obvious to someone slow. "Economy is toward the back." Heat crept up Ada's neck. She pulled out her boarding pass and held it up. "No, I have seat 2A. First class." Christine took the boarding pass with 2 fingers, as if it might be contaminated. She held it up to the overhead light, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. The businessman in 3C glanced over, his expression shifting from curiosity to something uglier. "These people always trying to sneak into first class," he muttered to the woman across the aisle, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Christine's lips curled into a smirk. She didn't correct him. Ada's stomach tightened. "Is there a problem with my ticket? We've had issues with fraudulent upgrades lately." Christine's eyes remained cold. "I need to verify this with the gate agent." "My ticket is legitimate," Ada said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My father purchased it." "I'm sure he did." Christine's tone dripped with condescension. "Please step aside while I confirm." Ada stood, her face burning. Other passengers began boarding, flowing around her like water around a stone. They stared. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. Others watched with open curiosity, their faces asking the same question Christine had voiced: "What's she doing in first class?" A white couple in their 30s passed her without a glance at their tickets. An elderly white man shuffled by, Christine greeting him warmly. Welcome back, Mr. Foster. So good to see you again. No one else was asked to verify their tickets. No one else was asked to step aside. 10 minutes crawled by. Ada remained standing in the aisle, her mother's purse clutched against her chest like a shield. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, Dad calling. She declined it. She didn't want to use her father's position. She didn't want special treatment. She just wanted to be treated like everyone else, to fly to her mother's funeral in peace. Christine finally returned from the gate, her expression triumphant. The system is running slow. You'll need to wait in the terminal while we sort this out. The flight is about to depart. Ada's voice cracked. My ticket is valid. Please, I need to get to New York. Ma'am, if you don't comply, I'll have to call security. The cabin went silent. Every passenger was watching now. Ada felt their eyes like weights pressing down on her shoulders. In that moment, standing in the aisle of a first-class cabin with a valid ticket in her hand, she understood exactly what her mother had fought against for so many years. The indignity. The assumption of guilt. The casual cruelty wrapped in professional politeness. A younger flight attendant, a Latino man with kind eyes and a name tag reading Abel Rodriguez, appeared from the galley. He looked at Christine, then at Ada, confusion crossing his features. Christine, is there a problem? We need to finish boarding. This passenger has a questionable ticket, Christine said. I'm handling it. Abel glanced at the boarding pass still in Christine's hand. It looks valid to me. I didn't ask for your opinion, Christine snapped. The captain emerged from the cockpit, a white man in his 50s with silver hair and tired eyes. What's the delay? Christine straightened. This passenger has a questionable ticket, Captain Walsh. I suspect fraud. Captain Walsh looked at Ada, then at the boarding pass. What makes you suspect fraud? Christine gestured at Ada, a vague wave that encompassed her entire appearance. It just doesn't seem right. Look at her. The words hung in the air, naked and ugly. Look at her. Look at her casual clothes in first class. Look at her black face where it doesn't belong. Captain Walsh took the boarding pass and studied it. Ada watched his face, searching for fairness, for reason. He frowned, turned the pass over, held it up to the light just as Christine had done. The ticket appears valid, he said finally, handing it back to Christine. His voice was quiet but firm. Seat her. Christine's face flushed. Captain, I really think we should verify with the gate. The ticket is valid. Seat her. Now. Christine snatched the boarding pass and thrust it toward Ada. Fine. Her voice was acid. You can sit. But we'll be monitoring you during the flight. Laughter erupted from seat 3C. The businessman grinned at his neighbor. Monitoring her. That's rich. Ada sank into her seat, her legs shaking. She buckled her seatbelt with trembling fingers and turned toward the window, willing herself not to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Abel Rodriguez caught her eye as he passed. His expression was sympathetic, apologetic. But he said nothing. He kept walking. The remaining passengers boarded. Ada stared at the tarmac, watching baggage handlers load luggage, focusing on anything but the stares still burning into the back of her head. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her sister, safe flight. Love you. Mom's waiting for you. Fresh tears threatened. Ada blinked them back and typed a response, I can't do this today. Not today. But she had no choice. The aircraft door sealed shut. The engines roared to life. Flight 447 pushed back from the gate, and Ada Hayes began the worst flight of her life. The plane climbed through scattered clouds, Dallas shrinking below. Ada kept her face pressed to the window, watching the ground disappear. At 30,000 feet, she thought, maybe things would be different. Maybe Christine would forget about her. Maybe she could make it to New York without further humiliation. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Throughout the cabin, passengers unbuckled and stretched. In economy, flight attendants began their service. In first class, Christine emerged from the galley with a gleaming cart loaded with drinks. She started at the front of the cabin, working her way back. Row 1 received their beverages with smiles and small talk. Row 3 got the same treatment. The businessman ordered scotch. Christine poured it with a flourish. She rolled past row 2 without stopping. Ada waited. Maybe Christine had simply missed her. It happened. But 10 minutes passed, then 15. Other passengers received their drinks. Pretzels appeared. Headphones were distributed. Ada sat untouched, invisible. She pressed the call button. The chime echoed through the cabin. Christine glanced up from where she was chatting with the silver-haired woman in 4A. Her eyes met Ada's, and something cold flickered across her face. She finished her conversation. Slowly. Deliberately. Then she strolled to Ada's row, her expression radiating annoyance. Yes. May I have some water, please? Ada kept her voice polite, neutral. We're busy with other passengers. I'll get to you when I can. Christine turned and walked away. Ada stared at her retreating back. Around her, every other passenger had been served. The businessman was on his second scotch. But apparently, the flight attendants were too busy to pour her water. 40 minutes crawled by. Ada's throat felt like sandpaper. The recycled air in the cabin was dry and stale. She thought about pressing the call button again but couldn't bear another dismissive encounter. Instead, she waited, watching Christine chat and laugh with other passengers, never once glancing toward row 2. Finally, Ada unbuckled her seatbelt. She needed to use the restroom anyway. Maybe she could get water from the galley on her way back. She stood and stepped into the aisle. Immediately, Christine appeared as if she'd been watching. The seatbelt sign is on. She planted herself in Ada's path, arms crossed. Ada glanced up. The sign was dark. No, it's not. It's been off for half an hour. I need you to return to your seat. I'm just going to the restroom. The seatbelt sign is on, Christine repeated, her voice rising slightly. The businessman in 3C looked up from his tablet. For God's sake, just let her use the bathroom. Christine whirled toward him. Sir, please don't interfere with crew operations. The sign is off, he insisted, pointing upward. I can see it from here. Other passengers were watching now, the cabin's attention drawn by the confrontation. Ada felt her face burning again, that same terrible heat of being on display, being made into a spectacle. Excuse me, she said quietly, and pushed past Christine to the restroom. She locked herself inside the tiny bathroom and braced her hands against the sink. Her reflection stared back from the mirror, eyes red and swollen, face tight with suppressed emotion. She splashed cold water on her cheeks and took several deep breaths. Just get through this, she whispered to her reflection. Just get to New York. Get to the funeral. You can fall apart after. She dried her hands and opened the door. The cabin looked peaceful. Passengers read books, tapped on laptops, dozed. Ada walked back to her row. Her mother's purse was gone. Ada froze, staring at her empty seat. She'd left the purse on her seat, tucked against the window. Now there was nothing. Just cream leather and an empty space where her mother's most precious possession had been. Panic surged through her chest. She spun around, scanning the aisle, the overhead bins, anywhere it might have been moved. Where's my bag? Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Christine appeared from the galley. What bag? My mother's purse. The brown leather one. It was right here on my seat. Christine's expression was blank, almost bored. I haven't seen any purse. Perhaps you didn't bring one. The words hit Ada like a slap. I had a purse. It was sitting right here. Where is it? Ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about. It was my mother's. Ada's voice cracked, rising despite her efforts to control it. It has her photos, her letters. Where did you put it? Passengers turned to stare. The silver-haired woman in 4A clutched her own designer bag closer, as if Ada might accuse her next. Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice. I will not lower my voice. Someone took my mother's purse. If you continue this disruptive behavior, I'll have to file a report. Disruptive? Ada's hands were shaking. My mother died 3 days ago. That purse is all I have left of her, and someone on this plane took it. Abel Rodriguez emerged from the galley, his face troubled. Christine, what's going on? This passenger is accusing the crew of theft. I'm not accusing the crew, Ada said desperately. I'm asking where my purse is. It was right here. Abel's eyes widened with recognition. The brown leather purse. I moved it. Christine's head snapped toward him. You what? We hit some turbulence while she was in the restroom. I moved it to the galley for safety. Standard procedure. He disappeared and returned moments later with the purse. Ada seized it, clutching it against her chest. Her mother's scent still clung to the leather, faint but unmistakable. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered to Abel. Christine's face had gone rigid. I didn't authorize you to touch passenger belongings. It's literally in the safety manual, Abel said quietly. Secure loose items during turbulence. We'll discuss this later. Christine turned back to Ada, her eyes hard. I'm going to have to file a report about your aggressive behavior. Shouting at crew members, making false accusations. False accusations? Ada's grief was transforming into something else now, something hotter. You told me I didn't have a purse. You made me think it was stolen. I said I hadn't seen it. That's not the same thing. You humiliated me from the moment I boarded. You questioned my ticket. You ignored me for 45 minutes when I asked for water. You blocked me from the restroom. And now you're filing a report on me? The businessman in 3C stood up. I'm a witness. This flight attendant has been targeting this woman since Dallas. The silver-haired woman in 4A nodded slowly. I saw it too. It's been disgraceful. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Other passengers were nodding, whispering to each other. Christine's face flushed deep red. She reached for the intercom and pressed the button. Captain Walsh, this is Christine in first class. I'm requesting law enforcement meet us at the gate. The passenger in 2A has been threatening crew and passengers. Ada's blood went cold. That's a lie. She attempted to assault me when I asked her to remain seated. I never touched you. Captain Walsh's voice crackled through the speaker. Confirmed. I'll radio ahead. New York police will meet the aircraft. Ada sank into her seat, her whole body trembling. Police. They were calling the police on her. For what? For asking for water. For looking for her mother's purse. For being black in first class. Her phone rang. Dad calling. This time, she answered. Dad. Her voice broke completely. Dad, I'm on the plane. They're calling the police. They're saying I threatened people. Theodore Hayes's voice was tight with controlled anger. Who's saying this? The flight attendant. Christine. She's been harassing me since I got on board. She took Mom's purse and now she's saying I assaulted her. Put her on the phone. Ada held out her phone toward Christine with a shaking hand. He wants to speak with you. Christine crossed her arms, her expression smug. I don't take calls from passengers' relatives during flight operations. It's against policy. It's my father. He wants to speak with you. Tell your father he can file a complaint through the proper channels after we land. Ada pulled the phone back to her ear. She won't talk to you. What's her name again? Christine Palmer. Tell her who I am. Ada looked up at Christine. The flight attendant was already turning away, dismissing her. He's Theodore Hayes, Ada said loudly. Christine paused but didn't turn around. FAA Director of Aviation Safety. The cabin went silent. Christine Palmer froze mid-step. The color drained from her face, leaving it waxy and pale. Slowly, she turned back toward Ada, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The businessman in 3C leaned forward. Wait. Theodore Hayes? The Theodore Hayes? The silver-haired woman gasped softly. Isn't he the one who shut down Southwest last year? The whole airline? For 3 days, the businessman confirmed, his eyes wide. Safety violations. He grounded their entire fleet. Christine's hand trembled as she reached for the phone Ada still held out. I didn't know. It shouldn't matter who my father is. Ada's voice was steady now, edged with steel. You should treat every passenger with dignity. Every single one. But you didn't. You saw me and decided I didn't belong. You decided my ticket must be fake. You decided I was a threat. All because of the color of my skin. There's been a misunderstanding. Christine's voice had lost all its earlier authority. It came out thin and desperate. I was just following protocol. What protocol? Abel Rodriguez stepped closer, his voice sharp. What protocol says to ignore a passenger for 45 minutes? What protocol says to accuse someone of lying about their stolen property? What protocol says to call the police on a grieving woman? The ticket looked suspicious. My ticket looked exactly like everyone else's, Ada said. The only thing suspicious was my face in first class. Christine reached for Ada's phone again. Mr. Hayes, if I could just explain. Theodore's voice came through the speaker, ice-cold and precise. Do not speak to me. You've done enough. Keep my daughter safe until landing. Ensure she has everything she needs. The FAA will be investigating this flight, this crew, and this airline. Do you understand? Sir, I have a family. I've worked for Skyward for 15 years. My daughter was traveling to her mother's funeral. My wife died 3 days ago. Our daughter was flying to say goodbye, and you turned her grief into a spectacle. You accused her of fraud, of theft, of assault. You called the police on a woman whose only crime was existing while black in a seat she paid for. The line went dead. Christine stood motionless in the aisle, the phone still extended toward her. Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others stared openly, their faces showing shock, embarrassment, dawning understanding. I'm sorry, Christine whispered. You're sorry you got caught, Ada said quietly. You're sorry my father has power. But you're not sorry for what you did. If I'd been anyone else, the police would be waiting for me in New York, and you'd be writing your report about the disruptive black passenger, and no one would question it. Christine opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. Captain Walsh's voice crackled over the intercom. This is your captain. We'll be landing in New York in approximately 20 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin. Abel moved past Christine and crouched beside Ada's seat. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? Something to eat? Water would be nice, Ada said softly. Thank you. He returned moments later with a bottle of water and a blanket. It gets cold up here. I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier. I've seen Christine do this before, and I never said anything. I'm sorry. Ada took the water and blanket. Thank you for telling the truth now. Christine retreated to the galley and stayed there. Through the curtain, Ada could hear her whispering urgently into a phone. Calling her union rep, probably. Or a lawyer. Trying to save her career. The plane began its descent. New York City appeared below, a glittering sprawl of lights in the gathering darkness. Ada pressed her forehead against the cool window and closed her eyes. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Alberta. Dad called. He told me what happened. I'm at the gate. I've got you. Another text appeared. Also, there are about a dozen FAA investigators here. This is about to get real. Ada almost smiled. Her mother had been a civil rights attorney, famous for her fierce advocacy and her refusal to back down. She'd sued airlines in the 80s when they tried to segregate passengers under the guise of security concerns. She'd won landmark cases that forced policy changes across the industry. And here was Ada, 3 decades later, fighting the same battle in the same sky. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump. The plane taxied to the gate, and Ada gathered her belongings. She held her mother's purse close, feeling the weight of it, the history contained in its worn leather. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers began standing, reaching for overhead bins. Many glanced at Ada as they passed. Some nodded. The businessman in 3C stopped at her row. I'm sorry, he said gruffly. What I said earlier. About these people. That was wrong. I was wrong. Yes, Ada said simply. You were. He nodded and moved on. The silver-haired woman paused too. I've seen this happen before, she said quietly. I never spoke up. I always thought it wasn't my place. But silence is complicity, isn't it? I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. You can speak up next time, Ada told her. There will be a next time. There always is. The cabin emptied slowly. Christine remained hidden in the galley. Captain Walsh stood at the cockpit door, watching passengers deplane. When Ada approached, he stepped into her path. Ms. Hayes, I apologize for what happened on my aircraft. I should have intervened more forcefully. Yes, Ada agreed. You should have. She walked past him into the jet bridge. At the gate, her sister Alberta stood waiting, tall and fierce in a sharp black suit. Next to her stood their father, Theodore Hayes, 60 years old and radiating quiet authority. His federal badge hung from his belt. 2 FAA investigators flanked him, both holding tablets and looking grim. Alberta pulled Ada into a tight embrace. Are you okay? Ada's composure crumbled. She buried her face in her sister's shoulder and sobbed, all the fear and humiliation and grief pouring out in wrenching gasps. I just wanted to get to Mom's funeral, she choked out. I just wanted to say goodbye. I know, baby. I know. Behind them, Christine Palmer emerged from the jet bridge, her face pale and drawn. She saw Theodore Hayes and froze. Miss Palmer. Theodore's voice cut through the terminal noise. I'm Theodore Hayes, Director of Aviation Safety for the Federal Aviation Administration. These are Senior Investigators Martinez and Johnson. We need to speak with you. Sir, I can explain. You'll have plenty of opportunity to explain in the formal investigation. Captain Walsh, you're grounded pending review of this incident. Captain Walsh had followed Christine off the plane. His face went gray. Sir, I didn't. You allowed systematic discrimination to occur on your aircraft. You're the captain. You're responsible. Christine's voice came out small and broken. Please. I've worked for Skyward for 15 years. I have a mortgage. I have children. Theodore stepped closer, his voice dropping but losing none of its force. My daughter was traveling to her mother's funeral. My wife. The woman I loved for 33 years. Our daughter was flying to say goodbye to her mother, and you decided she didn't deserve basic human decency. You accused her of fraud. You ignored her when she asked for water. You hid her mother's belongings and made her think they were stolen. Then you called the police on her. It was a misunderstanding. No. It was racism. And it ends today. He turned to the investigators. I want a full investigation of this flight. Interview every passenger. Pull the cockpit voice recordings. Get the cabin surveillance footage. I want to know every detail of what happened from the moment my daughter boarded that aircraft. Yes, sir. Theodore looked at Christine again. You're suspended pending the investigation's outcome. Security will escort you from the airport. 2 airport security officers approached. Christine looked at them, then back at Theodore, her eyes desperate. I made a mistake. Please. I'm sorry. You made 17 mistakes, Theodore said quietly. I know about the other complaints. The black teenager you had arrested for suspicious behavior. The Latino family you reported to immigration. The Muslim woman you had removed for making other passengers uncomfortable. 17 complaints in 3 years. All dismissed by your airline as misunderstandings. No more misunderstandings. Christine's legs seemed to give out. The security officers caught her arms and supported her weight. Ada watched it all through tears, her father's arms around her shoulders, her sister holding her hand. Justice, swift and certain, unfolding in a terminal gate at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. But as they walked toward baggage claim, Ada couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Ada Hayes stood in the shower of her sister's Manhattan apartment, letting scalding water pound against her skin. Outside the bathroom, she could hear Alberta on the phone, her voice rising and falling as she coordinated funeral arrangements. The hot water couldn't wash away the afternoon's humiliation, but it helped loosen the knot of tension in her shoulders. She emerged wrapped in a towel and found her father sitting at the kitchen table, his laptop open, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. At 60, Theodore Hayes still carried himself with military precision. He'd served in the Air Force before joining the FAA, working his way up through 3 decades of service. His hair had gone silver, but his eyes remained sharp and unyielding. You should rest, Alberta said, pressing a cup of tea into Ada's hands. The funeral is tomorrow. I can't rest. Ada sank into a chair. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back on that plane. Theodore looked up from his laptop. The investigation is already underway. I've assigned a full team. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. Not just for you. For everyone this has happened to. For everyone it will happen to if nothing changes. His laptop screen showed a spreadsheet filled with names and dates. Complaint records from Skyward Airlines, pulled from federal databases. Christine Palmer has been a problem for years, Theodore said. 17 formal complaints. All dismissed. The airline settled 3 of them quietly, made the passengers sign NDAs. The rest were just buried in paperwork. Ada leaned closer, scanning the list. Black passengers. Latino passengers. Muslim passengers. Asian passengers. A pattern so clear it was grotesque. How do they get away with it? Alberta asked. Because airlines are largely self-regulating when it comes to customer service complaints. The FAA handles safety issues. Discrimination falls through the cracks unless someone makes enough noise. Theodore's jaw tightened. I'm making noise. Ada's phone buzzed. Text messages flooded in. Friends who'd seen the news. Colleagues expressing shock and support. A few reporters asking for interviews. She silenced the phone and set it aside. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Theodore said, "we show them that actions have consequences." The next morning, Ada stood in a black dress before 300 mourners at her mother's funeral. Adelaide Hayes had touched countless lives during her 40 years as a civil rights attorney. The church overflowed with people she'd helped, cases she'd won, injustices she'd corrected. Ada gripped the edges of the pulpit, looking out at the sea of faces. Politicians sat beside former clients. Federal judges rubbed shoulders with community activists. Her mother had built bridges across every divide. "My mother spent her life fighting so people who looked like us could sit anywhere on the plane," Ada began, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. She sued airlines in the 80s when they tried to bring back segregation under different names. She won cases that changed federal policy. She dedicated her life to ensuring that civil rights weren't just written in law but lived in practice. She paused, gripping the pulpit harder. "This week, I learned that her fight isn't over. This week, I sat in a first-class seat and was treated like a criminal. I was questioned, ignored, accused, and threatened with arrest. Not because I did anything wrong. Because I didn't look like I belonged." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. "My mother would be furious that it's still necessary to fight this battle. But she'd also be proud that we're fighting anyway. She taught me that silence is complicity. She taught me that dignity is not negotiable. She taught me that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere." Ada's voice broke. "I miss her. I miss her wisdom and her strength and her absolute refusal to accept cruelty as normal. But I hear her voice. And it's saying what it always said: stand up. Speak out. Don't stop until it's right." The congregation rose in applause. Ada stepped down from the pulpit and collapsed into her father's arms. After the funeral, after the reception, after the endless condolences and hugs, Ada sat alone in her old bedroom at her father's house. Her phone glowed with notifications. The story had exploded on social media. Hashtag Flight 447 was trending nationally. News outlets had picked it up: FAA director's daughter discriminated against on flight. Flight attendant suspended after targeting black passenger. Racism at 30,000 feet, one woman's story. The comments sections raged with debate. Some people called it an overreaction. Others shared their own stories of discrimination on airlines. The conversation was loud, messy, and growing by the minute. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Comment number 1 if you think Theodore Hayes is right to investigate this incident, or comment number 2 if you believe this is an overreaction. Have you or someone you know ever experienced discrimination while traveling? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe every passenger deserves dignity regardless of their skin color, hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep sharing stories that matter. Now, what happens when a father with federal authority decides enough is enough? What you're about to hear will shock you. 3 days after the funeral, Theodore Hayes held a press conference at FAA headquarters in Washington. The room packed with reporters, cameras, and national news crews. Theodore stepped to the podium in a dark suit, his expression grave. "Good morning. I'm here to announce a comprehensive investigation into discrimination practices at Skyward Airlines. This investigation was triggered by an incident involving my daughter, but it extends far beyond that single flight." Camera flashes erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Theodore raised a hand for silence. "Let me be clear. This is not about my daughter specifically. This is about a pattern of discrimination that has been allowed to persist in American aviation. We have uncovered 17 formal complaints against a single flight attendant over 3 years. 15 of those complaints involved passengers of color. All were dismissed by airline management." He clicked a remote, and a screen behind him lit up with data. Our preliminary investigation has revealed that black passengers are 3 times more likely to be removed from skyward flights than white passengers. They are 5 times more likely to have their tickets verified before boarding. They are 7 times more likely to be reported as disruptive, even when engaging in the same behaviors as white passengers. The room exploded with questions. Theodore spoke over them. This ends now. The FAA is launching a full audit of Skyward Airlines passenger treatment protocols. We will review training materials, complaint procedures, and disciplinary actions. We will interview current and former employees. We will examine every complaint filed in the last 5 years. A reporter called out, "Director Hayes, some are saying this is personal. That you're abusing your authority to punish an airline that mistreated your daughter." Theodore's gaze was steel. "Yes, it's personal. It's personal to every black parent who wonders if their child will be humiliated for existing. It's personal to every person of color who pays the same price for a ticket but receives lesser treatment. But personal doesn't mean wrong. The data supports action. The law demands accountability. And my authority exists precisely to protect passengers from this kind of systematic abuse." Another reporter, "What about the flight attendant? What happens to her?" "Christine Palmer is suspended pending the investigation's outcome. If the investigation confirms what we already know, she will be terminated and banned from working in commercial aviation. Is that fair for one mistake?" Theodore leaned into the microphone. "It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern of behavior spanning years. It was 17 documented incidents. It was a culture that allowed racism to flourish unchecked. And it ends today." The press conference lasted an hour. Theodore presented data, timelines, documentation. He announced the formation of a special task force to examine discrimination complaints across all major airlines, not just Skyward. "We've allowed a system where passengers of color have fewer rights at 30,000 feet than they do on the ground," he said in closing. "That system is being dismantled. Starting now." As Theodore left the podium, his phone rang. The White House. The Secretary of Transportation. The CEO of Skyward Airlines, all demanding meetings, all promising cooperation. The story went viral within hours. News networks ran special segments. Social media exploded with personal stories. Black travelers shared experiences of being profiled, questioned, removed from flights. Latino families described being asked for documentation. Muslim passengers recounted being stared at, reported, treated as threats. The conversation shifted from whether discrimination existed to how deeply it was embedded in the industry. Skyward Airlines released a carefully worded statement: "We take these allegations seriously and are cooperating fully with the FAA investigation. Skyward is committed to treating all passengers with respect and dignity." Public response was swift and brutal. Celebrities announced boycotts. Corporate clients canceled contracts. Stock prices tumbled. Within 48 hours, Skyward's market value had dropped 30%. But Theodore Hayes wasn't finished. He was just getting started. 2 weeks after her mother's funeral, Ada returned to work at her law firm in Boston. She'd taken bereavement leave, but sitting at home only meant dwelling on grief and anger. Work offered distraction, structure, something to focus on besides the video of her confrontation with Christine Palmer that had been viewed 8 million times. Her colleagues greeted her with sympathetic nods and awkward silences. No one quite knew what to say. How do you address a coworker who'd become a national symbol of airline discrimination? Her boss, a white woman named Clara Richmond, called her into the office. "Ada, welcome back. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing." Clara shifted in her chair. "I want you to know the firm fully supports you. What happened was inexcusable." "Thank you. That said, we've had some media inquiries. Requests for interviews. I wanted to check with you before responding." Ada tensed. I'm not doing interviews. Are you sure? This could be an opportunity to amplify your voice, to become a professional victim. Ada's voice was sharper than intended. To have every conversation, every case, every professional achievement reduced to, that woman from the plane. No. I'm a lawyer, not a cause. Clara nodded slowly. I understand. We'll decline all requests. But the requests didn't stop. Reporters camped outside Ada's apartment. Her phone rang constantly with unknown numbers. Even her personal email was flooded with messages. Some supportive, offering solidarity and shared stories. Others vicious, accusing her of playing the race card, of ruining an innocent woman's career, of being a privileged elite using her father's position for revenge. The hate mail was the worst. Threats arrived daily, detailed and disturbing. Ada forwarded them to the FBI and tried not to think about them before bed. Meanwhile, the FAA investigation expanded beyond anything she'd anticipated. Theodore assembled a team of 12 investigators. They descended on Skyward Airlines headquarters like an occupying force, demanding personnel files, training records, complaint logs, internal communications. They interviewed every passenger from Flight 447. Aaron Bennett, the businessman who'd initially mocked Ada, gave a statement filled with remorse. I laughed, he told investigators, his voice thick with shame. When the flight attendant humiliated her, I laughed. I was complicit in her degradation. I've thought about it every day since. How many other times have I been complicit? How many other times have I seen injustice and done nothing? Adelaide Cooper, the elderly passenger, testified as well. I've seen this happen before. In the 60s, the 70s. I thought we'd moved past it. I was wrong. We just got better at pretending. Abel Rodriguez, the flight attendant who'd retrieved Ada's purse, provided the most damning testimony. He brought documentation, screenshots of internal communications, recordings he'd made of crew meetings. Christine wasn't an outlier, he told investigators. She was encouraged. Management praised her for being tough on security. They rewarded her for removing passengers they deemed problematic. And problematic always meant the same thing: black, brown, Muslim, poor. He presented emails from Skyward's VP of Operations, sent to all crew managers: we need to minimize complaints from certain demographics. They're statistically less likely to sue, so focus your customer service efforts on our premium travelers. The investigators pulled training materials. Role-playing scenarios used in flight attendant training depicted disruptive passengers exclusively as people of color. The suspicious behavior checklist included items like clothing inconsistent with ticket class and difficulty understanding instructions. Captain Adrian Walsh, grounded since the incident, was interviewed for 6 hours. His testimony revealed a culture where crew members were told to trust their instincts about passenger threats, with no guidance on checking those instincts for bias. If a flight attendant felt uncomfortable, we backed them, Walsh admitted. No questions asked. I see now how that policy enabled discrimination. I should have questioned Christine's assessment. I should have seen what was happening. I failed. The investigation uncovered pattern after pattern. Skyward had settled 23 discrimination complaints in the past 5 years alone. All settlements included non-disclosure agreements, preventing victims from speaking publicly. The airline had paid out over $4 million in settlements while publicly denying any systematic problems. Theodore presented these findings to Congress. The Senate Commerce Committee called emergency hearings. Theodore sat before a panel of senators, charts and data projected on screens behind him. Senator Abraham Wheeler, a conservative from Texas, leaned into his microphone. Director Hayes, some argue this investigation is personal. That you're using federal authority to settle a score. Theodore's response was measured but firm. Senator, if my daughter hadn't been on that flight, none of this would have come to light. That's the problem. How many other passengers have been discriminated against with no recourse? How many filed complaints that were buried? How many just accepted the humiliation because they had no powerful father to advocate for them? He clicked to a news slide showing aggregated data across the industry. This isn't just Skyward. Black passengers across all major carriers are removed from flights at disproportionate rates. They're subjected to additional screening. They're monitored more closely. Their complaints are dismissed more readily. This is systemic, Senator. It requires a systemic response. Senator Adelaide Johnson, a black congresswoman from Georgia, spoke next. Director Hayes, what specific actions are you proposing? Complete overhaul of airline anti-discrimination protocols. Mandatory bias training with independent verification. Transparent complaint processes with third-party review. Real consequences for violations. And most importantly, an end to non-disclosure agreements in discrimination settlements. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. The hearing lasted 6 hours. Theodore presented case after case, data point after data point, building an irrefutable argument for sweeping reform. That evening, Skyward Airlines CEO, Adrian Foster, held his own press conference. He was a white man in his 50s, polished and media-trained, but sweat beaded on his forehead under the television lights. Skyward Airlines categorically denies systematic discrimination. While we acknowledge that individual incidents have occurred, these do not reflect our company values or policies. A reporter called out, "What about the 17 complaints against Christine Palmer?" Those complaints were thoroughly investigated and resolved. Resolved how? Through our internal review process. Your internal review process that dismissed every single complaint? Foster's jaw tightened. We stand by our review process. What about the VP's email telling staff to minimize complaints from certain demographics? That email was taken out of context. What context makes that acceptable? Foster stood abruptly. This press conference is over. He walked off the stage, leaving reporters shouting questions at his retreating back. The video went viral within minutes. Public backlash intensified. Celebrities announced they were boycotting Skyward. Corporations canceled travel contracts. Civil rights organizations called for nationwide protests. And Ada watched it all unfold from her apartment, her mother's leather purse on her lap, feeling the weight of what her single flight had set in motion. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Hayes. This is Aaron Blake. I worked with your mother for 20 years at the Legal Defense Fund." Ada's throat tightened. "I remember you, Mr. Blake. You spoke at the funeral." "I did. And I have a proposition for you. Your mother and I used to dream about bringing a class action lawsuit against the airlines for systematic discrimination. We never had the right plaintiff. Someone with standing, credibility, resources. Ada, I think you're that plaintiff. I'm not a civil rights attorney. No, but you're your mother's daughter. And you have something she never had, a paper trail showing undeniable bias, federal investigation backing, and a story that has captured national attention. Let's finish what your mother started." Ada looked at her mother's purse, at the photos tucked inside, at her mother's handwriting on old letters. What would the lawsuit demand? Public apology. Termination of everyone involved in dismissing complaints. Complete restructuring of discrimination protocols. And an end to the NDA policy. We want every victim's voice heard. Ada closed her eyes. Thought of her mother. Thought of all the passengers who'd suffered in silence. Thought of the fight that had been passed to her like an inheritance. I'll do it. Ada's lawsuit hit Skyward Airlines like a bomb. Filed in federal court in New York, it demanded not just compensation but fundamental change. The legal team Aaron Blake assembled was formidable, 8 attorneys, all civil rights specialists, all veterans of landmark cases. But the lawsuit was just the opening move. Theodore's FAA investigation expanded to include all major carriers. What his team uncovered shocked even the most cynical observers. The data painted a picture of institutional racism so pervasive it seemed impossible that it had remained hidden for so long. Black passengers were 3 times more likely to be removed from flights for disruptive behavior. Asian passengers were twice as likely to face random additional screening. Latino families were questioned about their documentation at rates far exceeding their proportion of travelers. Muslim passengers reported being stared at, reported by fellow travelers, and questioned by crew at astronomical rates. The numbers were damning. But the stories behind the numbers were devastating. A black doctor removed from a flight because a passenger felt threatened when he asked to retrieve his medical bag. A Latino family separated during boarding because crew members thought they looked suspicious. An Asian businessman questioned for 30 minutes because his American passport didn't seem right. A Muslim woman forced to remove her hijab to prove she wasn't hiding weapons. Hundreds of stories. Thousands of incidents. A pattern so clear it was undeniable. Theodore compiled this data into a comprehensive report and presented it to Congress. The hearings drew massive viewership. Every major news network carried live coverage. Senator Abraham Wheeler opened the second round of hearings with skepticism. Director Hayes, critics say you've weaponized the FAA for a personal agenda. How do you respond? Theodore didn't blink. Senator, if ensuring equal treatment for all passengers is a personal agenda, then yes, I'm guilty. But I'd argue it's also my legal mandate. The FAA is charged with ensuring safe and fair air travel. Fair means equitable. What we've uncovered is anything but equitable. He advanced to a slide showing data visualizations. These charts represent 5 years of passenger complaints across 10 major carriers. Notice the pattern. Complaints from passengers of color are dismissed at 3 times the rate of complaints from white passengers. Even when the complaints are identical, even when the documentation is the same, race is the determining factor in whether a complaint is taken seriously. Senator Adelaide Johnson leaned forward. Director Hayes, you mentioned consequences. What specific consequences are you proposing? Airlines that fail to meet anti-discrimination standards will be grounded until they achieve compliance. We're implementing a rating system, published quarterly, showing each airline's discrimination complaint rate, resolution rate, and passenger demographics of removed individuals. Transparency will drive accountability. Wheeler scoffed. You're proposing to ground airlines over customer service disputes. I'm proposing to ground airlines that systematically violate passengers' civil rights, Senator. The same way I'd ground an airline with systematic safety violations. Discrimination is a safety issue. When passengers of color can't trust that they'll be treated fairly, when they fear being removed from flights for existing, that's a safety issue. The hearing room buzzed with whispers. Wheeler looked ready to argue, but Johnson cut him off. I think Director Hayes is absolutely right. We've allowed airlines to operate with impunity for too long. The data is clear. The pattern is undeniable. What's your timeline for implementation? 30 days, Theodore said. Every major carrier has 30 days to submit comprehensive anti-discrimination plans. Those plans must include bias training, independent review boards, transparent complaint processes, and an end to NDAs in discrimination cases. Airlines that don't comply will be grounded. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Senators argued amongst themselves. Theodore sat calmly, waiting for order to be restored. That evening, the CEO of American Aviation announced that his airline was implementing Theodore's requirements immediately. We're not waiting for mandates, he said at a hastily called press conference. We're getting ahead of this. Full anti-discrimination audit starting tomorrow. Within 24 hours, 3 more airlines followed suit. Continental Express, Pacific West, and Delta all announced they were voluntarily grounding themselves to conduct comprehensive reviews of their policies and training. The economic impact was staggering. With multiple carriers grounded, airports emptied. Travelers scrambled to rebook. Stock markets reacted with volatility. Business leaders called for Theodore's resignation. But civil rights leaders rallied behind him. Protests formed outside airline headquarters, not against the groundings but in support of them. Signs read, "Dignity over dollars," and "No more flying while black." The White House felt the pressure. The president's chief of staff called Theodore to the Oval Office. Ada heard about the meeting from her father later that night. He sat in her sister's apartment, exhausted but resolute. "They wanted me to back down," he told his daughters. "Said I was crippling the economy. That I was overreacting." "What did you say?" Alberta asked. "I said the economy was built on crippling black people. Built on our labor, our exclusion, our systematic disadvantage. I said 1 week of inconvenience is nothing compared to decades of discrimination. I said if airlines want to fly, they can treat all passengers with dignity." Ada squeezed her father's hand. "What did the president say?" "He said I have 30 days to resolve this or I'm fired." The room went silent. "So I have 30 days to change the industry," Theodore continued. 30 days to force compliance. 30 days to prove that accountability is possible. Meanwhile, Christine Palmer attempted to control her narrative. She gave an interview to a conservative news outlet, presenting herself as a victim of federal overreach. "I made a mistake," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I admit that. But does one mistake justify destroying my career? Does it justify grounding airlines and costing thousands of people their jobs? I think Director Hayes is using his power to protect his daughter, and thousands of innocent people are paying the price." The interview was designed to generate sympathy. Instead, it sparked a backlash that Christine hadn't anticipated. Within hours, a Twitter thread went viral. A user had compiled video footage of Christine's previous incidents, obtained through FOIA requests and passenger recordings. The compilation was damning. Clip 1, Christine aggressively questioning an Asian passenger's English proficiency, speaking slowly and loudly as if to a child, even though the passenger was a professor at MIT. Clip 2. Christine demanding a Latino family prove that their children were actually theirs, insisting on seeing birth certificates, while a white family with adopted children of a different race passed by unchallenged. Clip 3, Christine calling security on a black teenager for suspicious behavior that consisted of wearing a hoodie and listening to music. The thread accumulated millions of views. Public opinion shifted decisively against Christine. Her claims of being scapegoated rang hollow in the face of documented evidence. Skyward Airlines, reading the room, announced Christine's termination. They held a press conference to announce the decision, trying to salvage their reputation. Christine held her own press conference the next day. She appeared without makeup, her eyes red and swollen. "I've lost everything," she said to the cameras. "My career, my reputation, my livelihood. I have 3 children. I have a mortgage. Is destroying my life not enough punishment?" A reporter called out, "What about the passengers whose lives you impacted? The doctor you had arrested? The family you separated? The teenager you traumatized?" Christine had no answer. She walked away from the microphone, and the press conference dissolved into chaos. Ada watched the coverage from her office. She felt no satisfaction in Christine's downfall. No triumph. Just a deep, weary certainty that this was necessary. That accountability, however painful, was the only path to change. Her phone buzzed. A text from Aaron Blake, court date set. 3 weeks. "Are you ready?" Ada looked at her mother's photo on her desk. Adelaide Hayes in her prime, fierce and uncompromising, standing outside a courthouse after winning a landmark case. Ada typed back, "I'm ready." Theodore Hayes stood in the FAA Operations Center, surrounded by screens showing real-time flight data across the United States. His team of analysts worked at computer terminals, tracking compliance submissions from airlines, monitoring complaint patterns, coordinating inspections. It was hour 71 of the most dramatic intervention in aviation history. 8 major carriers had voluntarily grounded themselves, recognizing that Theodore's 30-day ultimatum was not a bluff. They'd scrambled to implement new protocols, desperate to resume operations before losing more billions. But Skyward Airlines had refused to comply. CEO Adrian Foster had doubled down, calling Theodore's demands regulatory overreach and unconstitutional. He'd hired expensive lawyers, filed motions, given defiant interviews. So Theodore had grounded them. At midnight on day 3, every Skyward flight in the United States was ordered to land and cease operations. 53 airports immediately affected. Hundreds of thousands of travelers stranded. Economic impact estimated at $2 billion per day. The media went into overdrive. Headlines screamed about economic catastrophe. Conservative pundits accused Theodore of tyranny. Business leaders demanded his removal. But civil rights organizations rallied. Protests formed outside FAA headquarters, not against Theodore but supporting him. Thousands of people, black and brown and white, holding signs that read, "This is what accountability looks like," and "No justice, no flights." The pressure from the White House intensified. The president's chief of staff called every hour. Cabinet members demanded meetings. Political operatives leaked stories about Theodore's personal vendetta. Theodore ignored them all. He had a job to do. In the operations center, his deputy approached with a tablet. "Sir, 3 more carriers just submitted compliance plans. That's 11 total. Review them thoroughly. I want independent verification of every claim." "Yes, sir." The phone on Theodore's desk rang. He glanced at the caller ID inside. It was the president. "Mr. President." "Theodore, what the hell are you doing? You've shut down a quarter of American aviation." "I've grounded non-compliant carriers, sir. The ones flying are the ones that took discrimination seriously." "You're crippling the economy." "The economy has been crippling black people for centuries, Mr. President. 1 week of inconvenience is a small price to pay for systemic change. I'm getting pressure from every direction. Business leaders, donors, members of Congress. And I'm getting death threats, sir. My daughter is getting death threats. But we're not backing down. These airlines have operated with impunity for too long. That ends now." There was a long pause. "You have 72 hours, Theodore. 72 hours to get these airlines flying again or you're fired. Then I guess I better work fast." The line went dead. Theodore's team worked around the clock, reviewing submissions, conducting inspections, verifying claims. The compliant airlines had implemented impressive changes. Body cameras on all flight attendants. Independent passenger advocates on every flight. Complaint review boards with community representation. Quarterly bias training with certification requirements. Zero-tolerance policies with automatic termination for discrimination. Most importantly, an end to non-disclosure agreements. Every complaint would be public record. Every settlement would be transparent. Sunlight, as Theodore had said, was the best disinfectant. Hour 72 approached. Theodore reviewed the final submissions. 10 airlines had achieved compliance. 1 had not. Skyward Airlines submitted a plan 30 minutes before the deadline. Theodore read it with growing frustration. It was full of vague promises and minimal commitments. Training would be optional. Review boards would be advisory. Complaints would remain confidential, to protect privacy. It was compliance theater. An attempt to satisfy the letter of the law while violating its spirit. Theodore called Adrian Foster directly. "Your submission is insufficient." Foster's voice was tight with anger. "We've met every technical requirement. You've met no requirements. Your bias training is optional. Your review board has no authority. You're still using NDAs. This is a joke. This is what we're offering. Take it or keep us grounded." "I'll keep you grounded. You'll destroy thousands of jobs. You'll strand millions of passengers. You did that when you chose discrimination over decency. This is on you, Foster. Not me." Theodore hung up and turned to his team. "Skyward remains grounded indefinitely. All other compliant carriers are cleared to resume operations." The announcement went out at hour 72 exactly. 10 airlines resumed flights. Skyward stayed on the ground. The economic impact was immediate but manageable. Other carriers absorbed Skyward's routes. Prices increased temporarily but stabilized. The sky didn't fall. But Skyward's stock price did. It dropped 40% in a single day. Board members called emergency meetings. Shareholders filed lawsuits. Foster's position became untenable. 3 days after the grounding, Skyward's board forced Foster to resign. They installed an interim CEO, a black woman named Clara Morrison who'd spent 20 years at Continental Express building their diversity programs. Her first action was to call Theodore. "Director Hayes, this is Clara Morrison. I'm Skyward's new CEO. I want to comply with your requirements." "Actually comply, not pretend. Can we start over?" Theodore leaned back in his chair. "What are you offering?" "Everything you asked for. Plus an independent audit of our last 5 years of complaints. Plus compensation for every passenger we discriminated against. Plus a scholarship fund in your wife's name for students studying civil rights law. I want to make this right. Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm a black woman who's spent her career fighting the same battles your daughter fought on that flight. I've been Christine Palmer's target. I've been questioned, dismissed, humiliated. I know what it feels like. And I have the power now to make sure it doesn't happen again. Let me use it." Theodore was silent for a long moment. "You have 72 hours to submit a comprehensive plan. I want specifics, timelines, accountability measures. And I want it verified by independent civil rights organizations. You'll have it in 48. True to her word, Morrison delivered a plan that exceeded every requirement. Mandatory bias training with quarterly recertification. Independent review boards with hiring and firing authority. Public complaint database with quarterly reports. Compensation fund for past victims. Scholarship endowment. Zero tolerance with automatic termination." Theodore reviewed it with his team and with civil rights leaders. They approved unanimously. On day 10 of the grounding, Theodore held a press conference. "After thorough review, I'm satisfied that Skyward Airlines has met compliance standards. They may resume operations." Reporters erupted with questions. "What message does this send?" one called out. Theodore looked directly into the cameras. "That discrimination has consequences. That federal agencies exist to protect all citizens, not corporate profits. That my daughter, and every passenger who looks like her, deserves the same dignity and respect as anyone else. Some say you abused your power. Some said the same thing about the Civil Rights Act. About the Voting Rights Act. About every piece of legislation that challenged the status quo. Power exists to be used. I used mine to enforce the law. If that's abuse, I'm guilty." The first Skyward flight under Morrison's leadership took off that evening. Flight attendant Abel Rodriguez, promoted to lead trainer, made the announcement. Welcome aboard Skyward Airlines. Before we depart, I want to acknowledge that we've failed you. We've allowed discrimination to flourish. We've dismissed complaints and protected abusers. That changes today. Every member of this crew has completed comprehensive bias training. Every flight has an independent passenger advocate. Every complaint will be investigated thoroughly and transparently. We commit to treating every passenger with dignity and respect. We haven't earned your trust yet, but we're working to deserve it. Passengers applauded. Some cried. The flight took off into a clear evening sky, carrying not just people but the promise of change. 6 months after Flight 447, the American aviation industry looked fundamentally different. Every major carrier had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols. Bias training was mandatory and ongoing. Independent review boards handled complaints with real authority. Quarterly reports showed complaint patterns, resolutions, and demographic data. The sunlight of transparency was working. The numbers told the story. Complaints from passengers of color dropped 40%, not because discrimination had vanished but because it was being addressed before it escalated. Resolution rates increased 70%. Passenger satisfaction across all demographics improved measurably. But statistics only told part of the story. The real change was in the culture. Flight attendants who'd once trusted their instincts now questioned their biases. Captains who'd blindly supported crew decisions now asked harder questions. Airlines that had buried complaints now investigated them thoroughly. It wasn't perfect. Old habits died hard. Some flight attendants resented the new protocols, complaining about political correctness and walking on eggshells. Some passengers still faced discrimination. But now there were consequences. Real consequences. In the first 6 months under the new system, 37 flight attendants were terminated for discrimination. 12 captains were grounded. 2 airlines were fined heavily for attempting to circumvent the protocols. The message was clear: this wasn't temporary. This was permanent. Ada's lawsuit against Skyward moved through the courts. The airline, under Clara Morrison's leadership, didn't fight it. They negotiated a settlement that Ada herself designed. The conference room at Skyward headquarters was tense when Ada, her legal team, and Skyward's representatives met to finalize terms. Clara Morrison sat across from Ada, her expression serious. Ms. Hayes, we're prepared to offer $10 million in damages. Ada didn't hesitate. Counteroffer. $1 in damages. The room went silent. Aaron Blake raised his eyebrows but didn't interrupt. $1, Ada continued, plus a public apology. Plus permanent policy changes written into your operating certificate. Plus an endowment for the Adelaide Hayes Civil Rights Scholarship Fund. Plus quarterly public reports on your discrimination complaint handling. Plus mandatory rehiring interviews for every person of color you terminated or forced to resign in the last 5 years. Morrison leaned forward. That's more expensive than $10 million. Then don't agree to it. Morrison smiled slightly. I didn't say we wouldn't agree. I said it was expensive. We accept your terms. They shook hands. The settlement was announced the next week. The public ceremony took place at the federal courthouse in Manhattan. Media packed the room. Cameras lined the walls. Clara Morrison stood at a podium, reading from a prepared statement. On behalf of Skyward Airlines, I apologize to Ada Hayes. We failed her. We allowed a culture of discrimination to flourish. We dismissed complaints and protected abusers. We caused pain to countless passengers who trusted us with their travel, their time, their dignity. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. We failed Ada Hayes specifically and spectacularly. We questioned her right to occupy a seat she'd paid for. We ignored her requests for basic service. We accused her of crimes she didn't commit. We called the police on a grieving woman whose only offense was being black in first class. Morrison looked directly at Ada. We are sorry. Profoundly, completely sorry. And we are committed to ensuring this never happens again. Ada stood and approached the podium. The room fell silent. This isn't about me, she began, her voice steady and clear. It's about the teenager pulled aside for random screening every single time. It's about the businessman questioned about his first-class ticket because his skin doesn't match their expectations. It's about my mother, who fought this fight 30 years ago so I wouldn't have to, but here we are. She held up her mother's leather purse. This purse belonged to Adelaide Hayes, civil rights attorney. She spent 40 years suing airlines for discrimination. She won landmark cases. She changed federal policy. She died believing her work was done. Ada's voice broke slightly. It wasn't done. Discrimination didn't disappear. It just got more subtle. More deniable. More wrapped in the language of security and safety and corporate policy. She straightened, her voice strengthening. But because of what happened on Flight 447, because my father refused to accept injustice, because thousands of people shared their stories, because the system finally listened, we've taken a step forward. Not the final step. Not the only step needed. But a real, meaningful step. She looked around the room at the cameras, the reporters, the observers. To every person who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong, who's been questioned and dismissed and humiliated, I see you. Your experiences matter. Your dignity matters. And this settlement, this policy change, this accountability, it's for you. The room erupted in applause. Ada stepped down from the podium and was enveloped in hugs from her sister, her father, her legal team. Outside the courthouse, protesters had gathered, not in opposition but in celebration. Signs read, "Justice served at 30,000 feet," and "Ada Hayes, hero." Theodore stood beside his daughter, his arm around her shoulders. Your mother would be proud, he said quietly. Ada leaned against him. She'd be furious it was necessary. She'd be proud you did it anyway. That evening, Ada boarded a flight to Los Angeles for a civil rights conference where she was scheduled to speak. The flight was on Skyward Airlines. Her choice. The gate agent recognized her immediately. Ms. Hayes, welcome. We're honored to have you flying with us. Ada handed over her boarding pass and walked down the jet bridge. When she entered the aircraft, the flight attendant greeted her warmly. Welcome aboard, Ms. Hayes. Your seat is 2A. The same seat. By choice. Ada settled in by the window and pulled out her laptop. She was preparing a speech titled, "When Personal Pain Becomes Public Progress." As she wrote, she thought about her mother, about the long arc of justice, about the work still ahead. The captain made an announcement before takeoff. Folks, we have someone special flying with us today. Ada Hayes, whose courage changed American aviation. Ms. Hayes, on behalf of every passenger who's ever been treated unfairly, thank you. Passengers applauded. Ada, embarrassed but moved, waved slightly. The flight to Los Angeles was smooth. Professional service. Respectful treatment. Exactly what every passenger deserved but so many had been denied. When they landed, Ada walked through LAX and saw something that made her stop. A poster on the terminal wall, Airline Passenger Bill of Rights. Below it, clear instructions on how to file complaints, contact independent advocates, report discrimination. Her phone buzzed. A text from Theodore, "Proud of you. Mom is too." She typed back. "Love you, Dad. We're not done yet." At the conference, Ada met a young black woman waiting near the speaker entrance. She looked about 19, nervous and excited. "Ms. Hayes. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm studying aviation law because of you. Because of what you did." Ada smiled. What we did. It took everyone speaking up. But you started it. You didn't stay silent. Neither did you. You're here. You're studying law. Keep going. Sarah beamed. I will. I promise. Ada took the stage to a standing ovation. She looked out at hundreds of faces. All ages, all colors, all backgrounds. United by belief in justice, in dignity, in the possibility of change. Behind her, a screen displayed a photo of her mother from the 1980s, young and fierce, at a protest outside an airport. The sign in the photo read, "We have the right to fly with dignity." Ada began her speech. My mother always said that justice delayed is justice denied. But she also taught me that justice delayed can become justice delivered if we refuse to stop fighting. The camera pulled back, showing the full auditorium, Ada at the podium, her mother's image behind her, past and present merged in a single moment. 152 airports shut down, Ada continued, because one woman said enough. Imagine what we can do when we all say it together. 1 year after Flight 447, Ada Hayes sat in her office in Boston, reviewing case files. Her work as a corporate lawyer continued, but she'd added pro bono civil rights cases to her practice. Passengers discriminated against by airlines came to her, and she took every case that had merit. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Skyward Airlines. She almost declined, but curiosity won. This is Ada Hayes. Ms. Hayes, this is Clara Morrison. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. What can I do for you? I wanted to update you on our progress. We just published our fourth quarterly report. Discrimination complaints are down 62% from last year. Resolution satisfaction is at 91%. We've hired 500 employees of color in the last year, including 37 in management positions. Ada leaned back in her chair. That's impressive. We're not done. We'll never be done. But we're better than we were. And I wanted to thank you for forcing us to change. You're welcome. Though I wish the forcing hadn't been necessary. So do I. But it was. And I'm grateful. After Morrison hung up, Ada sat quietly for a moment. Change was slow, incomplete, imperfect. But it was real. Her father called that evening. Have you seen the news? Which news? 2 more airlines just announced they're implementing our protocols voluntarily. International carriers. This is spreading beyond the U.S. Ada smiled. Mom's smiling too. I know she is. 3 months later, Ada received an invitation to speak at the Smithsonian for the opening of an exhibition on civil rights in transportation. The exhibition featured stories from the Freedom Riders, Rosa Parks, and the fight to desegregate buses and trains. The final section featured Flight 447. Ada stood in the gallery, looking at the display. There was her boarding pass, preserved behind glass. Photos from the press conferences. Her mother's purse, donated to the museum. Video screens playing news coverage of the groundings, the hearings, the settlement. And at the center, a simple placard, one flight. One woman. One father's refusal to accept injustice. A movement for change. Visitors moved through the exhibition, reading, watching, reflecting. Ada overheard conversations. I remember when this happened, an older black woman said to her daughter. I cried watching the news. Finally, someone fought back. A young white man read the timeline with his son. This is why we always speak up when we see something wrong. Silence helps the oppressor. Ada walked through the gallery, anonymous in the crowd, listening to people engage with a story that had reshaped her life. Near the exit, she found a comment book where visitors could share reflections. She flipped through pages of responses. Thank you for your courage. This should never have been necessary, but I'm glad you fought. My daughter flies without fear now because of you. Change is possible. This proves it. Ada picked up a pen and added her own comment, for my mother, who started this fight. For everyone still fighting. For the next generation who'll finish what we started. She closed the book and left the museum. Outside, Washington, D.C. bustled with tourists and workers, the city alive with the machinery of government and the messy work of democracy. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Mitchell, the young woman she'd met in L.A., just got accepted to Harvard Law. Specializing in civil rights. Thank you for showing me this path. Ada typed back, congratulations. The path needs people like you. Walk it well. That night, Ada attended a gala for the Adelaide Hayes Civil Rights Scholarship Fund. The endowment had grown to $5 million, funded by Skyward Settlement and donations from across the country. This year, they were awarding scholarships to 20 students. Ada stood at the podium to announce the recipients. These young people represent the future of civil rights advocacy. They're studying law, policy, sociology, activism. They're committed to justice. And they're standing on the shoulders of giants. She gestured to a photo of her mother projected on the screen behind her. Adelaide Hayes believed that every generation has to fight for justice anew. That rights aren't preserved by laws alone but by people willing to enforce them, defend them, expand them. She fought her battles. We're fighting ours. And these students will fight theirs. The 20 scholarship recipients stood to applause. All ages, all backgrounds, all united by commitment to civil rights. After the ceremony, Ada stood on the hotel balcony, looking out at the city lights. Her sister joined her, pressing a glass of wine into her hand. You did good, little sister. We did good. Dad, you, me, everyone who spoke up. Think it'll last? The changes? Ada considered the question. Some will. Some won't. There'll be backsliding. There always is. But we moved the line forward. The next generation starts from a better position than we did. That's something. Mom would say it's everything. They stood in comfortable silence, sisters who'd lost their mother but found her legacy. Ada's phone buzzed one more time. A message from Theodore, dinner tomorrow? My place. She typed back, I'll bring dessert. Another message appeared, this one forwarded by her father. It was from the FAA, showing updated quarterly data from all major airlines. Discrimination complaints down across the board. Resolution rates up. Passenger satisfaction improving. The data wasn't perfect. Progress never was. But the trend line was clear. Ada looked at the numbers and thought about the long, strange journey from a humiliating flight to systemic change. Thought about her mother's leather purse and the memories it held. Thought about Christine Palmer, whose cruelty had inadvertently sparked a revolution. Thought about her father, who'd wielded institutional power for justice. Thought about Abel Rodriguez and Aaron Bennett and Adelaide Cooper and all the people who'd chosen to speak up when silence would have been easier. She thought about the next young black woman who'd board a plane, who'd sit in first class, who'd be treated with the dignity she deserved. And for the first time in a year, Ada felt something that had been missing since her mother's death. Hope. Not naive hope that pretended problems had vanished. But hard-earned hope that change was possible. That systems could be forced to transform. That individual courage could become collective action. That justice delayed didn't have to mean justice denied forever. She raised her glass to the city, to the future, to her mother's memory. We're not done yet, Mom, she whispered. But we're getting there. The next morning, Ada boarded another flight. Not Skyward this time, but Delta. As she settled into her seat, the flight attendant, a young black woman, smiled at her. Ms. Hayes, I just want to say thank you. I've been flying for 3 years, and the difference in the last year has been incredible. We have real training now. Real support. Real consequences for discrimination. You changed our industry. Ada shook her head gently. We all changed it together. Maybe. But you started it. As the plane took off, Ada looked out the window at the ground falling away, at the sky opening wide and blue ahead. She thought about all the flights her mother had taken, fighting case after case across the country. All the airports, all the terminals, all the battles. Now those same airports had passenger Bill of Rights posters. Those same airlines had anti-discrimination protocols. Those same skies held the promise of dignity for everyone who flew through them. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was better. And better was worth fighting for. So what do you think? Was Theodore Hayes right to ground those airlines, or did he go too far? Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. If you've ever experienced discrimination while traveling, share your story below. Your voice matters. And if this story moved you, if you believe in the power of standing up against injustice, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this don't spread without you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for believing that change is possible when we refuse to stay silent. Remember Ada Hayes. Remember Flight 447. Remember that sometimes, one person's courage can shut down 152 airports and restart them better than before. Until next time, keep fighting for justice. Keep demanding dignity. Keep believing that the arc of history bends toward justice, but only if we're willing to bend it ourselves. Take care of yourselves and each other. Ada Hayes' story teaches us that silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit. When Christine Palmer discriminated against a grieving passenger, it wasn't just one flight attendant's prejudice. It was a system that had enabled such behavior for years, dismissing 17 complaints and protecting the abuser while ignoring victims. The most powerful lesson is that institutional change requires institutional pressure. Individual complaints were buried, but federal intervention forced transparency and accountability across an entire industry. We learn that privilege isn't just about wealth or position. It's about whose complaints are heard, whose dignity is assumed, whose presence is questioned. Ada had a first-class ticket, yet her skin color made her suspect. This reveals how deeply racism permeates everyday interactions, turning routine travel into potential humiliation for people of color. Theodore Hayes showed us that power exists to protect the vulnerable, not just the powerful. He could have used his position to quietly resolve his daughter's situation. Instead, he exposed systemic discrimination affecting millions. His willingness to ground airlines and face political backlash demonstrated that real change demands courage from those with authority. Finally, we learn that justice requires collective action. Ada's lawsuit, passenger testimonies, Abel Rodriguez's documentation, and public outcry all contributed to transformation. One voice can start a movement, but movements succeed when everyone refuses to stay silent. What would you have done if you witnessed what happened to Ada on that flight? Would you have spoken up like Aaron Bennett eventually did, or would you have stayed silent? Drop a comment below and share your honest answer. Have you or someone you know ever experienced discrimination while traveling? Your story matters. Share it in the comments so we can learn from each other's experiences. If you believe that every passenger deserves dignity regardless of their skin color, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories about justice, courage, and the fight for equality. And here's the most important part, share this video. Share it with your family, your friends, your coworkers. Share it with anyone who needs to understand that racism isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes it's a flight attendant questioning your ticket. Sometimes it's being ignored when you ask for water. Sometimes it's being treated like a criminal for existing in a space where people think you don't belong. Thank you for watching this story. Thank you for caring about justice. Thank you for being part of a community that believes change is possible when we stand together. Remember, 152 airports shut down because one woman refused to accept injustice and one father refused to let it slide. Imagine what we can accomplish when we all refuse to stay silent. Stay strong, stay vocal, and keep fighting for a world where everyone can fly with dignity. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Justice is a journey, not a destination, and we're all walking it together.